The sound that woke Marcus before dawn on Sunday was subtle, a rustling followed by a quiet splash. He bolted upright from his restless sleep, fumbling for his headlamp. The beam revealed a nightmarish scene. A pack of coyotes scattered from his campsite, leaving behind his shredded backpack. His main water container lay punctured, the precious liquid already absorbed by the thirsty desert floor. No! His scream echoed across the empty landscape as he lunged forward, pathetically trying to scoop the damp sand into his bottle. All that remained was half a liter in his personal flask, barely enough for a few hours in this inferno. When the sun rose, it revealed the full extent of his situation. His face in the reflection of his phone screen was nearly unrecognizable, lips split into bloody cracks, cheeks sunken, eyes bloodshot and wild. His urine had turned an alarming amber color when he relieved himself, and the simple act of standing sent waves of dizziness crashing through him. The desert had transformed overnight. What had seemed merely challenging now appeared actively malevolent. Every cactus a sentinel standing guard against his escape, every distant shimmer a false promise. Even the map felt like it was deliberately misleading him, the landmarks shifting position when he blinked. Higher ground, he rasped to himself. Need to see where I am. The climb to a nearby ridge became an odyssey of suffering. Each step required conscious command to muscles that screamed for hydration. By the time he reached the top, his shirt was crusted with salt from evaporated sweat, and his last water was gone. The view revealed nothing but more desert stretching to every horizon. No roads, no trails, no salvation. His phone showed 12% battery remaining. No signal. He tried to take a video for his family, but found himself unable to speak coherently, his thoughts fragmenting like shattered glass. By mid-afternoon, the hallucinations began. First came the voices, his sister calling his name from behind boulders, his father's distinctive whistle from his childhood. Then visual distortions followed, a park ranger waving from a distance, disappearing when he stumbled toward her. Most disturbing was the persistent apparition of his ex-wife walking beside him. "You always had to prove something," she said, her voice as clear as it had been during their last fight. "Always pushing boundaries nobody asked you to push." In a moment of terrifying clarity, Marcus recognized the symptoms: severe dehydration progressing to heat stroke. The medical training from his wilderness first aid course surfaced through the delirium. He needed shade, needed to stay still, needed to conserve energy. Yet something primitive had taken control, a desperate animal instinct that kept driving him forward, convinced that salvation lay just beyond the next ridge. The rational part of his mind screamed in protest as his body stumbled on, drawn by mirages that his dying brain manufactured with cruel perfection. Time became non-linear, reality fragmenting into disjointed moments of lucidity, punctuated by stretches of dreamlike confusion. During one clear interval, Marcus found himself sitting under the slight overhang of a boulder, with no memory of how he'd arrived there. His clothes were torn in places they hadn't been before, and fresh scratches covered his arms. He'd been moving without conscious awareness, a terrifying realization. The sun's position suggested several hours had passed. The skin on his forearms had blistered badly, and his tongue felt like a foreign object in his mouth, swollen and dry as jerky. When he tried to stand, his legs buckled beneath him. The fall sent bright flashes of pain through his vision, momentarily clearing the fog. "Help!" He tried to call, but produced only a hoarse whisper that wouldn't carry 10 feet. The absurdity of it struck him, and he began to laugh, a broken, rasping sound more chilling than any scream. "Think!" he commanded himself, forcing his mind to function despite the cottony fog that had begun to fill it. Options. List your options. He could attempt to climb higher, gain perspective on his surroundings. He could follow the path of least resistance downhill, where water might naturally collect. He could build a signal fire, though the thought of adding more heat to this inferno seemed absurd. Or he could simply wait, conserving energy and water, hoping his sister would raise the alarm when he didn't check in on Sunday evening. The decision crystallized with unexpected clarity. He would move only at dusk and dawn, when temperatures dropped to survivable levels. During the brutal midday hours, he would shelter as best he could, rationing water with fanatical precision. Each swallow became a complex calculation of need versus sustainability. As the day's heat reached its zenith, Marcus created a makeshift shelter using his emergency blanket stretched between rocks. The thin barrier offered little protection from the relentless sun, but it was better than nothing. Beneath it, he curled into a tight ball, trying to minimize the surface area of his body exposed to the heat. Time stretched and distorted like the horizon. Minutes became hours, hours compressed into heartbeats. His thoughts wandered to his ex-wife. What would she think when she learned he was missing? Would she feel anything at all? The divorce had been her idea, her declaration that his restlessness, his constant seeking of the next summit, the next challenge, had built a wall between them that she could no longer scale. When the edges of his vision began to darken, Marcus forced himself to drink. The water was hot enough to steam in a cooler environment, but he gulped it greedily, feeling the temporary revival as his body absorbed the precious moisture. Each swallow was counted, measured against the diminishing supply. As the afternoon crawled toward evening, a terrible certainty settled over him. He was genuinely lost in one of America's most unforgiving environments, with resources dwindling by the hour. The confident man who had waved away the ranger's warnings seemed like a stranger now, a fool whose arrogance had led him to this desperate situation. The desert had extended a challenge, and Marcus Stillwell, for perhaps the first time in his adventuring life, was losing. Marcus awoke at dawn on Saturday to a sense of wrongness that crept through his campsite like morning fog. The landmarks surrounding him matched nothing on his map. Where there should have been a distinctive cluster of boulder piles to the east, there was only an unfamiliar ridge that seemed to mock his confusion. Just disoriented from sleep, he muttered, reaching for his high-end GPS device, the same one that had guided him through the cloud forests of Costa Rica. The screen flickered weakly, flashed a critical battery warning, and went dark. He stared at it in disbelief, a cold knot forming in his stomach as he remembered the charger sitting on his kitchen counter, still plugged into the wall. A bark of laughter escaped him, partially at his own carelessness, partially to mask the first stirrings of fear. "Amateur move, Stillwell," he said aloud, his voice swallowed instantly by the vastness. His phone showed no signal, but still had battery. The compass app indicated he needed to head southwest to reconnect with the main trail. Simple enough. He packed quickly, ignoring the whisper of dread that had begun to curl around his confidence. The journey quickly turned brutal. The seemingly straightforward path devolved into a maze of loose scree that slid treacherously under each step and narrow ravines that forced frustrating detours. Every landmark became a cruel deception. What looked like an easy pass would reveal itself as a sheer drop only visible at the last moment. By midday, the temperature display on his watch read 117 degrees Fahrenheit, but it felt like walking through an open furnace. His water consumption had doubled against his careful plans. Marcus caught himself staring vacantly at the rippling heat waves, his thoughts coming in strange, disconnected fragments. "Shelter," he mumbled when he spotted what appeared to be a small structure in the distance. The sight triggered a surge of desperate hope. Rangers sometimes maintained emergency stations in remote areas. His pace quickened despite screaming muscles. 20 minutes later, he stood staring at a shadow cast by an oddly shaped rock formation, the mirage now painfully obvious. The crushing realization came with a new awareness. The position of the sun indicated he'd been walking east, not southwest. His water supply had dwindled to less than a gallon. When he tried to check his map again, his hands trembled so badly he dropped it, watching helplessly as the wind carried it into a ravine too steep to safely navigate. Marcus sank to his knees, the scorching earth burning through his hiking pants. His training had always emphasized one rule above all others: when lost, stay put. Movement without direction only compounded the problem. Search teams looked where they expected you to be. Moving made you harder to find, not easier. But staying meant trusting that someone would look for him, that someone would notice his absence quickly enough, that the vastness of Joshua Tree wouldn't swallow all evidence of his existence. By Monday morning, 36 hours passed when he should have returned. Marcus had crossed into a realm of suffering few humans experience, and survived to describe. His kidneys felt like they were being stabbed with each motion. The sand beneath his feet seemed to undulate like ocean waves. Most terrifying was the complete absence of sweat. His body had depleted its water reserves entirely. In desperation, he had resorted to the survival technique he'd always told others was a last resort, drinking his own urine. The warm, concentrated liquid made him gag, but provided momentary psychological comfort. What the wilderness training manuals didn't emphasize was how this measure actually accelerated dehydration, concentrating toxins his failing kidneys could no longer process. A moment of horrifying clarity broke through his delirium around midday. The distinctive rock formation ahead, a natural arch about 8 feet high, was familiar. He'd passed it 3 hours earlier, and possibly the day before. He had been walking in circles. With trembling hands, he retrieved his phone. Battery, 3%. Enough for one final act. Elaine, he croaked into the camera, his voice a rasp that sounded nothing like the confident brother she knew. His face, when he switched to selfie mode, was a shock. Lips black with cracks, eyes sunken into bruised sockets, skin blistered and peeling. Mom, Dad, I made mistakes. Don't blame. The screen went black before he could finish. The afternoon became a nightmare of falls and increasingly feeble attempts to rise. Each collapse took a greater toll. During one particularly violent tumble down a gentle slope, his leg struck a jagged rock that tore through his hiking pants and deep into his calf muscle. The wound gaped obscenely, white bone visible beneath torn flesh, yet barely bled, a sign of severe dehydration that even in his delirium he recognized as ominous. The final indignity came as he lay stunned from the fall. The immediate arrival of flies to the wound, their persistent buzzing a grim preview of what would happen to his body if he died here. Marcus Stillwell, who had stood triumphantly on peaks that few humans ever reached, now crawled on his belly toward the meager shade of a twisted Joshua tree. The movement took nearly an hour to cover 30 feet. As the sun finally began to set, the hallucinations returned with disturbing vividness. A search party called his name just beyond the next rise. His childhood Labrador, 15 years dead, bounded toward him with a water bottle in his mouth. His ex-wife knelt beside him, stroking his hair and apologizing for everything. Here, he tried to shout, but produced only a rasping whisper. I'm here. His attempts to wave attracted nothing but the continued interest of the flies and a curious raven that had begun to follow him, nature's patient observer of the dying. His survival training had prepared him for many emergencies, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for the psychological impact of knowing you might die alone in an indifferent wilderness. Marcus had always imagined his end, if it came during an expedition, would involve some dramatic moment. A fall from a great height, perhaps, or being caught in an avalanche. Something quick and keen and worthy of a newspaper article. The slow, unglamorous deterioration of his body and mind had never figured into his imagination. There was no dignity in this, in soiling himself when his muscles failed, in crying with no tears because his body had none to give, in hallucinating conversations with people who weren't there. A memory surfaced with unexpected clarity. His father's voice from his childhood after Marcus had gotten lost during a family camping trip. Respect nature, son. It's not just bigger than you. It doesn't even know you exist. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for him like grasping fingers, Marcus made a decision. If he were to die here, he would at least try to leave some record, some evidence of what had happened. With trembling hands, he retrieved his phone. Battery, 8%. Enough for one last effort to document his experience for whoever might find his body. He pressed record, squinting at his own face in the screen's reflection. The stranger who stared back bore little resemblance to the confident hiker who had set out just 2 days earlier. I made mistakes, he began, each word a struggle to form. Started with leaving the trail. While Marcus fought for his life in the desert, a different drama unfolded in the outside world. His sister Elaine had spent Sunday evening staring at her phone, waiting for the promised, made it back safely text that never came. By midnight, she was pacing her apartment, calling his number repeatedly only to reach voicemail. At dawn on Monday, she was already at the ranger station, Marcus's detailed trip itinerary, and the photo of his planned route in hand. The same ranger who had warned Marcus studied the map with growing concern. "Your brother is an experienced hiker?" she asked. "3 continents," Elaine replied, the pride in her voice undermined by fear. "Experience can be dangerous out here," the ranger said quietly. "The experienced ones go further, take more risks, trust their abilities too much." By midday, a full search operation had mobilized, ground teams, ATVs, and a helicopter. But as Monday turned to Tuesday with no sign of Marcus, hope began to fade. The search area expanded to cover variations from his route, accounting for possible navigation errors. Still, nothing. "We're looking for a body now," one searcher told another, not realizing Elaine was within earshot. Tuesday afternoon, the helicopter pilot noticed something that didn't belong: a splash of blue against the tan landscape, miles from any trail. As they circled lower, the spotter confirmed a human form sprawled beside a Joshua tree, motionless. The medical team that propelled down found Marcus Stillwell in a condition that hardened rescuers later described as the closest thing to a living mummy they'd ever seen. His skin had cracked and blurred, then baked into a hardened shell under the sun. His core temperature registered at 104 degrees Fahrenheit, despite the cooler morning air, a sign his body had lost the ability to regulate itself. Most disturbing were his eyes when they pried open the swollen lids, vacant, yellowed, and entirely uncomprehending. "He's alive," the medic radioed back, her voice reflecting both professional detachment and stunned disbelief. But barely. The trauma team at Palm Springs Hospital had never seen dehydration so severe in a living patient. Marcus's blood work revealed a catastrophic cascade of system failures: kidney shutting down, rhabdomyolysis releasing toxic levels of muscle proteins into his bloodstream, brain swelling from electrolyte imbalances, and liver function collapsing. "Less than 30% chance," the lead physician told Elaine bluntly. "And if he survives, he won't be the same." Against medical predictions, Marcus Stillwell did not die, but his resurrection came at a terrible price. 3 months later, he was released from the rehabilitation facility, a hollowed version of the man who had confidently strolled into the desert. Dialysis 3 times weekly became his new normal after losing 70% of his kidney function. Nerve damage left his hands and feet in constant pain, prone to tremors that made even holding a cup difficult. Most profound were the cognitive changes, memory lapses, difficulty processing new information, and occasional aphasia where he would lose words mid-sentence. Yet from this broken vessel emerged an unexpected purpose. 6 months after his rescue, Marcus stood before a conference of outdoor enthusiasts, his gaunt frame supported by a cane, his once resonant voice now a fragile instrument that commanded attention through its very weakness. "I was experienced," he began, the words delivered with painful deliberation. That was the problem. The silence in the auditorium was absolute as he continued. "Experience breeds arrogance. Arrogance blinds you to danger, and the desert." He paused, his damaged mind searching for the words. "The desert feeds on arrogance first." The video of his speech went viral within the outdoor community. Rangers at Joshua Tree National Park now include Marcus's story in their mandatory safety briefings, using the actual coordinates of his rescue to demonstrate how small navigational errors compound into fatal mistakes. Each year, they emphasize the desert claims lives through the same pattern, not dramatic accidents or sudden catastrophes, but through cascading errors, each one seemingly minor, each one closing another escape route until survival becomes impossible. What makes Marcus Stillwell's case remarkable isn't how he got lost, but that he lived to serve as a warning. The Rangers end their presentation with the most chilling aspect of all: statistics showing that most desert victims are found less than 5 miles from safety, having walked in circles while salvation remained just beyond their awareness. Today, a specially marked warning on the Joshua Tree trail maps bears Marcus's name and a simple message: respect the desert. It doesn't care how much experience you have. The healing process continued long after Marcus left the hospital. Physical therapy became the central focus of his days, relearning basic movements, rebuilding atrophied muscles, adapting to the limitations that would remain permanent. The tremors in his hands might improve marginally over time, the neurologist explained, but would never fully disappear. His kidneys would never recover beyond their current diminished function. But it was the psychological healing that proved most challenging. For a man whose identity had been built around physical capability and wilderness conquest, accepting his new limitations required a complete reconstruction of self. The first time he attempted a simple nature walk on a paved path with his sister, he suffered a panic attack so severe that park officials called an ambulance. The sound of wind through leaves, he later explained to his therapist, it sounded like whispers, like the desert was following me. Nightmares plagued him, dreams of endless walking, of thirst so profound it felt like his very cells were screaming, of realizing too late that he'd made fatal mistakes. He would wake drenched in sweat, reaching desperately for the water bottle he now kept within arm's reach at all times. Elaine moved in with him for the first year, witnessing the most difficult moments of his recovery. One morning, she found him sitting motionless on the patio, staring at a small cactus in a decorative pot. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing," he replied, his voice distant. "Just thinking about respect." The outdoor safety conferences gave him purpose, a way to transform his suffering into something meaningful. Each time he shared his story, the effort took a physical toll, but the emotional reward grew. He began to measure success differently, not in peaks conquered or trails completed, but in the faces of those who listened, who might make better choices because of what he endured. Gradually, Marcus found his way back to wilderness spaces, but with a profoundly different approach. He joined a support group for injured outdoor enthusiasts, eventually leading gentle walks designed for those with physical limitations. His new mantra, repeated to every group, was simple. Nature doesn't care if you conquer it, it just waits. 3 years after his rescue, Marcus returned to Joshua Tree National Park, not to hike, but to participate in a ceremony dedicating a new emergency shelter and water station along a popular trail. As park officials unveiled the small structure, they revealed its name, Stillwell Station. "Not named after me," Marcus told the small crowd, leaning heavily on his cane. "Named after what I learned too late. Be still. Be well." His damaged voice carried across the desert air, competing with the wind that still occasionally spoke to him in whispers he could almost understand. The desert had nearly taken everything from him, but in the thin space between life and death, Marcus Stillwell had found something unexpected. Wisdom that could only be purchased at the edge of extinction. Marcus Stillwell's collection of hiking medals and patches sat in a display case in his downtown apartment, trophies from 3 continents and some of the world's most challenging terrains. At 34, he'd built a reputation among his friends as the man who could survive anything. The bitter irony of this reputation wasn't lost on the park rangers who would later search for him. The divorce papers had been finalized on a Tuesday. By Friday, Marcus was already pulling his meticulously packed Jeep into the Juniper Flats trailhead at Joshua Tree National Park. The temperature reading on his dashboard flashed 102 degrees Fahrenheit, but he hardly noticed. This weekend's solo trek was meant to be cathartic, a way to sweat out the poison of the past year. "Sir, we're expecting record temperatures this weekend," the park ranger said, her eyes narrowing at his lone wolf demeanor. "Several trails are marked hazardous due to the heat wave." Marcus gave her the same confident smile that had charmed his way through Patagonia and the Himalayas. "I've hiked through Death Valley in August," he replied, tapping his hydration system. "The desert and I understand each other." The ranger handed him an extra emergency pamphlet. "The desert doesn't negotiate, Mr. Stillwell." Before setting off, he snapped a photo of his planned route and texted it to his sister Elaine. "Back by Sunday evening. Don't worry if I don't respond. Heading into the dead zones. This is exactly what I need." The last 4 words were unnecessary, but somehow important to him, a declaration of independence from the life that had crumbled. As he disappeared down the trail, The sun transformed the landscape into a bleached alien world. The silence was absolute except for the crunch of his boots and the occasional skittering of a lizard. The vastness made him feel gloriously alone, exactly what he wanted. When he spotted a rock formation that resembled a twisted face in silent scream, he veered off the marked path for a closer look, dismissing the small voice of caution in his mind with practice.